Hey, welcome back to the Big Ranch Show. Thank you for joining me. Now, today we're going to talk about the debt ceiling deal, and how we're preventing default on our $31 trillion in debt. Now, there's been a lot of talk about this. It even came down to a point where we actually thought that the GOP hardliners were going to be able to prevent us from actually paying our debt and defaulting for the first time in American history. Now, we can talk about the national debt and how it's too high and why it got there, in another video. And that's probably going to come pretty shortly. Because there are a lot of things we could do to reduce our debt and our spending. But we don't need to do it on the back of the poor and working class. Meanwhile, the billionaire and millionaire classes get off scot-free and get extra tax cuts that the rest of us don't get. But that's a whole other video. But yes, we thought for the longest time here, the last few months, that the GOP was just going to let us go right off the cliff and default on our debt. Now, our debt ceiling isn't about incurring more debt. Raising the debt ceiling is about paying the debt we've already incurred. For example, right, you've paid a credit card bill. That bill comes due after you've spent the money. If you don't spend that money, your interest rate can go up. You can lose access to your card, and your credit history can be destroyed. No different here. What happens if America defaults on its debt? Our interest on the debt that we're paying, which is billions of dollars already, would skyrocket, making us have more debt because we wouldn't be able to make the payments. As of June 5th, payments will not be able to be made to people on, Social Security, veterans benefits, things like that. There's like a $98 billion bill due on June 5th for those kinds of things. But it looks like we have a deal. It looks like a deal that is supposed to pass tonight. Will probably pass. Looks like we're gonna have a successful debt ceiling increase. But there are some caveats to that, right? There's always some kind of deal, and people are mad on both sides of the aisle about this deal. I think that's great. I think it's absolutely wonderful that people on both sides of the aisle didn't get what they want. Why? Because that means it's compromise. You know, in any compromise, both sides aren't going to get exactly what they want. Compromise has become a bad word in this country when it comes to economic policy. And I think that's kind of failing us as a nation. Because you have people on one side, on the left, that want to do it one way, people on the far right that want to do it one way. And we don't function as a society, as a country, as a nation, if we're doing that, right? Like, I believe there should be massive spending for the poor, elderly, children, education, healthcare in general. But at the same time, I also understand that some of the ideas I have are not currently viable. Now, there are things that could make our debt cheaper, like I said, and we'll discuss those in future videos. But let's talk about what's in this deal, right? Let's talk about what's in the deal. I'm going to read a little bit of information here. Under the deal, non-defense spending would remain flat for fiscal 2024. It would only increase by 1% in fiscal 2025, roughly leaving $704 billion, which would be for both Veterans Affairs and medical and other areas of the budget, right? So 121 billion of it would go to veterans medical care, and 583 billion would go to other areas of the budget, right? And this is the one thing: military budget does not get cut, or the military care budget, the VA budget, does not get cut in these spending cuts. And that's one of the things that I was very adamant against, that I thought we just could not do, because it's not fair to the people that served this country, fought in war for this country, to not be able to get the medical care they need. We're already having enough problems at the VA with people not getting the care they need. We don't need to make it harder on them. In fact, veterans deserve any bit of health care they want and need. I don't think that should be a debate. I don't think there should be a question between the left and the right on if we're going to take care of our veterans. Because if you can't afford to take care of your veterans, don't send them to war. But we're going to talk about the other things that are being cut here, right? We're talking about a 1% increase in 2025, and for 2024, what the GOP wanted was a complete rollback to 2022 spending levels, and that would be a major cut. It would have been like 22% cut possibly for some areas. But those are some of the things that they're cutting, right? They're cutting spending on non-discretionary spending, right, or non-defense discretionary spending. Um, the deal also gets back some of the money, roughly $30 billion in COVID funds that were unspent, that were just sitting around. So that's another one of those things I completely agree with. I completely and wholeheartedly agree with the idea that we need to get the COVID funding money back that hasn't been spent. It could be used elsewhere or used to pay down the debt. And so it's not seeming like that bad of a deal, right? Now, growth can be a problem, because if you're going to cap it at 1% for 2025 and you're not going to raise it at all in 2024, you're going to have departments that are going to have to make cuts. A provision in the bill, too, says that if they don't pass an annual budget or spend annual spending bills, then they will have to revert back to the previous year's debt, which I'm not quite understanding how that works, because it doesn't make a lot of sense. That if you don't pass 12 annual budgets or spending bills, that you have to revert back to the previous year's funding. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. But that's one of the things they're doing. But tucked away in this bill, which I think in the end it's not the end of the world, it's not the worst thing ever to happen. Let me find it here. It expands work requirements for people receiving TANF and SNAP benefits, and these changes would end in 2030. It says here, currently, childless, able-bodied adults 18 to 49 are only able to get food stamps for 3 months out of every 3 years, unless they are employed at least 20 hours a week or meet other criteria. This agreement would increase the upper limit of the mandate to age 55. However, the deal would expand exemptions for veterans people who are homeless, and former foster youth in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program known as SNAP. I don't think this is terrible, because I don't see it as terrible that somebody 55 and over, or 50 to 55, um, would necessarily, that would be able-bodied, that wouldn't be working. I think if you're able-bodied and you can work, you should work. Um, and so I understand where this is coming from. I think both sides of the aisle can kind of agree that um, adding 5 or 6 years to the requirements may not be that bad, um, for able-bodied people. The thing is, though, they need to make it easier for those people who are not able-bodied. Because I've known a lot of people that are in their early 50s that for whatever reason they can't work anymore. So I want to be sure those people can still get the help they need. And so this should be, based on what we read there, that should be the case, right? we should be able to um, increase the limit on age for receiving food stamps from not working to 55. I don't see that as a major issue because I do leave the caveat in there, that allows people that are disabled, elderly, and otherwise unable to work. Um, it says, however, the deal would expand exemptions. Okay, whatever, and all that would end in 2030. The Biden administration believes that about the same number of food stamp recipients would be subject to work requirements because the exemptions, though it's waiting for a formal estimate. So these people should be okay that aren't able to work among between 50 and 55. The deal would maintain full funding of veterans' health care. It would increase support for the PACT Act's Toxic Exposure Fund to nearly $15 billion. There again, something else that needs to happen. Um, it also includes cuts to the Internal Revenue Service funding bills. House Republicans have been determined to jettison roughly $80 billion in IRS funding over the 10 years contained in the Inflation Reduction Act. Um, Now, this I think is absolutely ridiculous. They were supposed to be getting new people to replace retiring people. This is just going to make our wait times even longer. Like if you file a tax return, it's going to take longer for you to get your tax return because these are supposed to be frontline workers that talk to people on the phones and the IT people backstage that basically keep everything functioning. But they're only roughly going to lose about 20, I guess about 20 billion from that 80. The deal would repurpose 10 billion for fiscal 24 and 10 billion for fiscal 25, according to a House source. Now, the one that's really going to anger a lot of people, even though at the end of the day it was already in the books, Joe Biden was already planning to do this. Um, Student loan repayments will start back again for the first time since COVID started. Joe Biden has delayed this a few times as he's been president. Donald Trump delayed it, I think, once too, because during COVID, people weren't going to be able to make these payments. Now we've got people working again. Most people that are working are going to be able to start making their payments. The income based and income driven repayment plans are still an option, are still there. You can still use them to base your monthly student loan payment based on your income as opposed to the full um, brunt of it that some people just can't pay. I suggest that if you're, especially if you're low income, that you work on that you try that through your servicer or through the Department of Education, because that's absolutely a lifesaver. It can save you a lot of money. But the thing is, student loan repayment was going to start back in November anyway, and it's, I believe, it's supposed to be 60 days after July 29th. It could be June 29th. Um, but 60 days after that, student loan repayments would start. Um, Let me check and make sure. Maybe I can give you a date on that. Let's see. Let's see. Looking. Right. This isn't really telling me what's going on at all, but on that front. But I believe it's June 29th, 60 days after June 29th, not July 29th, that student loan repayments will start being able to be collected by your servicer or the Department of Education, whoever your servicer is. Um, Also, it's going to expedite a natural gas pipeline in West Virginia. Um, some people are very mad about that. Um, It was something Joe Manchin was wanting, Republicans were wanting to speed up the process of. I'm not sure what they need another natural gas pipeline for. It's like needing another oil pipeline. It's like we need another one of those. Like we need, you know, like we need a default. Um, but apparently, this is going to be helpful to people in um, West Virginia, especially for the companies that drill, natural gas. But all in all, the bill isn't 100% good for everybody. Each side has things that they didn't like. Like the Republicans didn't like the fact that the IBR, the income based repayment plans were allowed to stay. They don't like the fact that spending on climate was going to be maintained, for the subsidies and things like that are in place to help fight climate change, especially from the infrastructure or the Inflation Reduction Act that were put into place. And then they're liberals. They're not happy because the IRS isn't going to be able to function as well as it could have with having all the people replaced. But all in all, I think it's a good compromise bill. I think it's something that will at least move us forward for the moment. And I'm sure there are a lot of liberals out there too that are also upset about the food stamp age limit increase on work requirements. Personally, I think some of the work requirements are absolutely insane. And it doesn't make a lot of sense because the moment you get on food stamps, they require you to start working. But the moment you start working, they take your food stamps away. And that doesn't allow you to function, right? It doesn't allow you to get off of it because you end up having to, limit your hours just so you can get food stamps. Because if you work, say you work 20 hours, right at 20 hours, and you're getting, say, $50 a month in food stamps, if that, right? You may not be able to get any food stamps with increase to 21 hours or 22 hours, right? You might not get any at all, and 1 or 2 hours, maybe even 4 hours, really doesn't change your paycheck that much. We figure that out here in my own family. My wife was working 4 days a week. Now she's working five, and it's a whole extra 5 hour shift that she's getting. But she's not making any money. That hasn't increased our funds that much. But anyhow, that's the debt ceiling deal. That's what they'll be voting on tonight in the House. If it passes the House tonight, then it should be a sure shot to get to Biden's desk, and we should be in good shape. Anyhow, y'all have a great day. I'll see you down the road, and let's hope this passes.